guys, it's Jess and welcome back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if it is your first time here. Today I'm going to be doing my wrap up for the month of March, and I had a stellar reading month in March, so let's just jump straight in. Okay, so I took part in middle grade March this month, which is a readathon which was hosted by Katie from Life Between Words and Krista from Books and Jams. So even though I didn't read all my middle grade books in one section, I will do my ordinary books first and then I will do my middle grade books at the end. So if you're only interested in my middle grade March wrap up, then I will leave the timestamp here. So the first book that I finished in March was Firefly Lane by Kristin Hannah, and if you recognise the name Kristin Hannah, then that is because she is the author of The Nightingale, which was one of my, or is one of my all-time favourite novels. And this was the first Kristin Hannah book that I have picked up since reading The Nightingale. So I went in with pretty high hopes about what this book was going to be like. It's basically the story of female friendship. So we have two female characters. We have Kate and we have Tully, who come from two very different walks of life, and when they are teenagers their lives kind of converge, and they are a very unlikely friendship, but their friendship is then covered throughout the next however many decades. I think it's like 30 years or something like that, and we follow Kate and Tully as they find their place in the world, as they find out who they are and how their friendship kind of changes and molds them because of all the things that go on in their lives. And Kristin Hannah has a way of writing characters which is just phenomenal, even when you don't really like them, even when you find yourself increasingly frustrated by them, which I certainly did in this novel. You still can't help but root for them a little bit, and you still can't help but have them get under your skin, because there were several parts in this novel where I was just so frustrated by the characters. Tully is a very selfish character. She comes from a single parent background and her mum was very neglectful of her, so she kind of had to fight for herself, which made her very feisty, and that's a really great character to have in a story. I always love the feisty characters, but there were moments in time when she was so selfish, and I really just wished that somebody would give her a slap and just say, you know what, it can't always be about you, love. And then likewise, Kate came from a very secure family background, but in many ways was a little bit of a wet blanket and let people and Tully walk all over her. So there were many moments in the book when I also really wanted to just be like, oh my word, Kate, grow a pair, like just stand up for yourself. And despite that, I still found myself completely engrossed in the story, and at the very end, just in floods of tears about the end of the book. So as I said, you know, it wasn't without its flaws, and there were several parts that I felt really dragged, but there's something about the way that Kristin Hannah writes characters that they just get under your skin and you feel all the feels. So it definitely had its plot holes and its flaws, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. The second book I'm going to talk about is A Magic Study by Maria V. Snyder. This is the second book in Maria V. Snyder's Chronicles of Ixia series, so it's difficult to give you too much of a synopsis without giving away what happens in the first one, but we pick up Elena's story where it leaves off in the first book, and I just loved this as much as I loved the first one. There is something very straightforward and enjoyable about Maria V. Snyder's writing. She has built a fantastical world, but there isn't a huge amount of world building that goes on, and yet you know exactly where you are in the story and you can really picture yourself there, and I really appreciate that. It's just a really easy fantasy book to pick up and fall into, and I really enjoyed this, and I cannot wait to read the third book and find out where the story goes next, because yeah, I just really enjoyed it. I think if you are looking for a soft fantasy book with a bit of magic in it and a bit of intrigue, then this is definitely a good option. Next we have Lie With Me by Sabine Durant. I'm not sure if you would call this a psychological thriller or just a thriller, but this is the story of Paul, who is a middle-aged man, and Paul is something of a sponger. So he had success with a novel in his younger days and he's kind of living off the back of that success, even though he's written multiple stories since then which have all been rejected by publishers. He lives in his friend's flat, his friend works abroad, and Paul kind of house sits for him, but he likes to pretend that he has this very lavish, very luxurious lifestyle. So he is a bit of a sponger, he's a bit of a loser, and he is a bit of a liar. And Paul bumps into an old college friend one day and somehow gets embroiled in his family life and gets invited on a holiday, and the story kind of unfolds from there. And it really is a story about the little lies that we tell and how they can have a snowball effect on the people around us and on ourselves in general. And the ending of this book, it was interesting actually, because there's very little to like about Paul. He is just a down and out loser who has no sense of responsibility and believes that it's kind of everybody else's job to make his life better without him actually trying to do anything different to improve his living situation. But there is a twist at the end, which I'll admit I didn't see coming. I'm sure lots of people saw it coming, but I personally didn't see it coming. And when it arrived, I couldn't help but feel sorry for Paul. So it was a really interesting place to be in, because all the way through this book I just was thinking, oh my word, you are so sad and just sort yourself out. And then by the end of the book I actually felt quite sorry for him and the way that everything kind of fell out and the way that his cards landed at the very end. I mean, I can't say that he didn't deserve it, but I did also feel sorry for him. Having said that, this was a super quick read. It's not complex in the slightest. It's a bit spine tingly, but it's not gonna kind of keep you up at night. It's just a very quick, very interesting read, and there's not much to it. But yeah, if you're looking for a really quick, easy beach read, then I think that this one is definitely a good one to go for. Next we have How to Stop Time by Matt Haig, and this was the Bookish Mama's book club pick for March. That is always a mouthful. I've got to work out a better way of saying that. So this is about our protagonist Tom, who has a condition which means that he ages a lot slower than the average human being. So he has actually been alive for centuries when it is our present day, and he has been alive through Jazz Age Paris, and he has been alive in Elizabethan England, and has just had all kinds of interesting experiences. And there are a number of people who are like Tom. So they are in a society called the Albatross Society, and they refer to themselves as the Albas and everyone else is the Mayflies, and it's kind of the Albas' job to protect each other and to not tell anyone about their condition, because they believe that they will be experimented on and that kind of thing. So Tom particularly lives under a cloud of fear, and the person in charge of this society has given them all instructions that they're not to fall in love, because falling in love complicates things. They have this policy where, in order to evade suspicion, because they don't age in the same way, they can only stay in one place for 8 years before they have to move on and start a new life. So there's never really any sense of settling down either. So Tom has lived for centuries in this kind of temporary existence, and this is really a look at what it is to be human and what we need to be human, because Tom's life is ultimately incredibly lonely. He can never make lasting connections with anybody because he knows that ultimately in a number of years he'll have to move on and start again. And of course, at the point that this book begins, he's kind of beginning to realise that he needs more from his life than this, and he needs to have that connection, and someone comes into his life and the story kind of unfolds from there. I really enjoyed this. There were a number of points in the story which were real, like, special quote moments where Matt Haig really explored humanity, and I just really enjoyed it. It wasn't, again, it was a book that wasn't quite what I was expecting, especially when I got to the end and realised that Matt Haig had actually written this because of his difficulty with mental illness and in trying to talk and deal with a hidden condition, which obviously Tom has because he can't tell anybody that he ages so much slower than the average human. So yeah, I just really enjoyed it. It was a different concept, it was an interesting concept, but I thought that it was also a really interesting and moving read, and I really liked Matt Haig's writing style, and I'm definitely interested to pick up some more of his books. Moving on now to the middle grade books that I read in March. The first one I picked up was Gangster Granny, and I listened to this on audio with Meg and Eli when we did a long car journey down to see my parents. This is a book written by David Walliams, who is a UK comedian, and he's written a number of children's books, but this was the first one that I have ever read or listened to. And this is about a young 10-year-old 6-year-old boy who every Friday night has to go and stay with his granny, and he just thinks it's the most boring thing on the planet. His granny serves cabbage all the time, and she smells like cabbage, and she's old, and she makes him play Scrabble, and there are just 100 other things that he wishes that he could do. At the same time, he feels somewhat neglected by his parents, and so he's just going through a little bit of turmoil in his life. And then one day he discovers that maybe his granny had a more exciting past than he thought. This is a book which is just so funny. It has so many references to childhood that you can just have a chuckle about. The kids just thought it was hilarious. It's narrated by David Walliams, and he does all the voices, and I just think he was the perfect person to narrate his story. And it's just full of humorous moments and a bit of self-discovery with a little bit of a moral in it as well. It involves a heist to try and steal the crown jewels from the Tower of London, and it was just a really, really funny book. And I think if you have middle grade children, or even, I mean, Eli's 6 and he really, really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend the audiobook because I think it was just a fantastic experience and I really enjoyed listening to it with the kids. Next we have my favourite book of the month, and that was The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. This book was just perfection. I adored everything about this book. I don't know if I just read this book at the right moment or what, but it is whimsical, it is magical. I loved the writing style, I loved the journey that we were taken on, I loved the descriptions, I loved everything about it. I could easily see myself rereading this book several times in the next few years because it is just a gorgeous example of storytelling. So we start the story by learning that there is a witch living in a forest, and every year one of the villagers near to this forest sacrifice the youngest baby in the community in order to stay the wrath of the witch. But the witch isn't quite what the villagers seem to think, and she actually rescues this baby and takes them across the forest to the other side and gives the baby to a family, and these children are known as Starlight children, and she has been doing this for years and years and years. And one year she rescues this baby, and instead of feeding them starlight as she normally does to sustain them while she travels, she accidentally gives this baby moonlight and enmagics her, and so she decides to keep the baby and raise her as her own. She calls her Luna, and she tries to teach her in the ways of magic, and that is literally all I'm going to say. There is so much more to the story than that, but I really think that you should go into this as blind as possible and just discover the magic of it for yourself, because I just loved it. I cannot praise this book highly enough. There were no issues for me at all. I really enjoyed the journey. Yeah, I can talk and talk and talk about this book. It is beautiful, and I would highly recommend it for both middle grade children and adults alike. It's gorgeous, and I loved it. It was definitely a 5 out of 5 for me. Then we have Inside Out and Back Again, and I'll just zoom in on the author's name because I'm not going to attempt to butcher it. This is a book written in free verse, and it's about a young Vietnamese girl who has to flee to America with her family following the Vietnamese War. So we start with her life in Vietnam, and then we follow her journey across the ocean, and then as she tries to acclimatise and adjust to her new life in America. And this is just a really sweet story about this young girl who has been uprooted from everything that she knows, travelled thousands and thousands of miles, and then has to begin again, and she doesn't really understand why. It's about situations out of her control. It's about her trying to adjust to these huge changes in her life, and it's just told really beautifully. Everything about the writing style is so simplistic but really powerful, and it was such a quick read because it's written in free verse. So every chapter is just a couple of pages like this, and I would highly recommend this. I loved the diversity. It's definitely something that I'm now interested in. I've never read a book set in Vietnam. I've never read a book about anyone from a Vietnamese background, I don't think. So I'm really interested to maybe read some more historical fiction set around that time. But yeah, if you're interested in reading a book written in a different style, because free verse is another type of book that I've not picked up before, then I would definitely recommend this. It was super easy to read, but it was just a very beautiful, very innocent, very captivating story, and I really enjoyed it. Then we have 5 Children and It by E. Nesbit, and this one I picked because I read this as a child and I have not picked it up in all the years since. I was sent this copy by Alma Classics, which I just think is so interesting, especially for a middle grade book. It's just really colourful and bright, so I wanted to give this a go. And E. Nesbit is a classic children's author. The Railway Children was one of my all-time favourite childhood books as well, and I really loved the movie that they made of it. So this is a story about 5 children who go to stay somewhere for the summer, and one day while they are out exploring they come across a sand fairy, and this sand fairy can grant them wishes. And it's very much about these children realising that sometimes the things that you wish for the most actually aren't going to be the best things for you, and they get into all kinds of scrapes and all kinds of mishaps. And it's very much a coming of age story of them realising that they are very lucky, of them realising what they have, and that maybe beauty and wealth and big changes in their lives are not necessarily the best things for them at this moment in time. I really enjoyed it. E. Nesbit's writing is quite interesting, and I read this and was kind of stumbling a little bit over the formality of the writing and of her writing style, and I put it down to the age of the book. But following this I picked up Black Beauty, which was written in a completely different writing style, and I think was written quite a few years earlier. So I just think that maybe it's E. Nesbit's writing style, but once I got into the flow of the way that she writes I found it very easy to get on with, and yeah, I really enjoyed it and I'm really glad that I picked it up. And then I've already mentioned it, but the final book that I read this month was Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. Again, this was a classic book from my childhood and I really wanted to reread it, and I'm so glad that I did. This is a fascinating story because it's told entirely from the perspective of a horse called Black Beauty. So we start with his life as a young foal in the fields and we end with him kind of in retirement, and he goes through all kinds of situations. He is a gorgeous, glorious specimen, so he's kind of the prized horse in a household, but through no fault of his own he ends up in smoggy, smoky London pulling carriages and not living a very nice life at all. And I just really enjoyed this for the kind of whimsical storytelling that it is. You know, Black Beauty is not always treated very well, he doesn't always have the best kind of life, and I feel like Anna Sewell maybe wrote this to demonstrate that just because animals can't talk, just because we refer to them as dumb animals, doesn't mean that they're not intelligent and that they don't know what is going on around them, and the mistreatment of animals is never acceptable. And I feel like she was making a really early statement with this book, and I just really enjoyed it. It's beautiful, it's sad, it's emotional, and it has a lot of nostalgia for me. And again, I'm really glad that I decided to reread this, and yeah, I think I'm inspired to watch the film now as well, because yeah, I just think that it's such a wonderful little story. So there you go, they are the books that I read in the month of March. Do let me know if you've read any of the same books and what you thought, or let me know what you're reading now. I always love to know. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more content. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all soon.